Hi there, I'm Alan Hennand, Vedic astrologer. Today I'd like to talk a bit about Nicolas Cage, who was in the news quite recently, having gotten married for the fourth time. And wait, breaking news, he got divorced 4 days later for the fourth time. I'm interested to look at his chart, to see what's going on vis-a-vis relationships. So here's his chart, Sagittarius rising, but take note, the first degree of Sagittarius rising with 5:30 birth time. Boy, we astrologers hate to see that because it makes us wonder, what if he were born 4 minutes earlier? That would give him a Scorpio ascendant. But at the same time, he'd end up with a chart with absolutely no planets in the Kendras. For a guy who's, become, box office material and won an Academy Award and for leaving Las Vegas and had, a pretty stellar movie career, I think this is unlikely. But there's a couple of other tests that we can apply to this just to see, is this reasonable? Let me put it back to Sagittarius. One thing we know about his family, his father was an academic. So ninth lord, sun. Sun is also the Karaka for the father. Here it is in Sagittarius, in the first house with Mercury. Sun and Mercury form a Buddha Ditya Yoga, so it's a mark of intelligence. The dispositor is Jupiter. Jupiter is in its own sign, Pisces. In fact, Jupiter forms a Hamsa Yoga, one of the Mahapurusha yogas. So this, looks like a father, of some esteem and with intelligence, education, and in an academic environment. That all seems to make sense. Then the other thing that's quite notable about Nicolas Cage over the years, he's made a lot of money. He's also spent like a madman as well too. And the guy has, over his lifetime, owned something like 22 personal residences. And, a fleet of yachts and, several garage full of cars. Not quite to the extent of a Jay Leno collector, but he's had a lot. So, vehicles are reflected by the fourth house, property and vehicles. So, property, it's a given. He's literally owned castles. He owned a castle in Germany. He owned a castle in England. He's had huge estates throughout the United States. And he's bought and sold and bought and sold and bought and sold, sometimes like a collector flipping things, but other times, when he ran into hard times financially, he's been foreclosed upon and been forced to sell. But the point is, he's had a lot of properties. So Jupiter in Pisces certainly represents multiplicity and, opulence, we might say as well too. And vehicles, vehicles include anything and everything that you use as a means of transport. So it's your cars, it's your boats, it's your airplanes. So he's owned lots of cars, several Rolls Royces and many other luxury cars, lots of yachts, and at one point owned a Gulfstream private jet. So on that score, I think vehicles and properties, I'm quite happy to leave this with a Sagittarius rising and a powerful Jupiter in the fourth house to reflect property and vehicles. Now, this is not about that. This was just sort of a very crude, quickie form of rectification to see if this chart made sense. Let's, jump straight into the whole relationship thing, which is, the subject of today's little talk. So first thing you note is that a dual sign rising. So whether it's Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, dual signs are notoriously ambivalent about the need to enter into marriage and then, having done so, to stay in marriage. Now, there have been lots of people in the past who are quite notorious for their variability, let's say, with respect to relationships. John F. Kennedy was one. He was only married once, but the rumors of his affairs are legion. Hugh Hefner, well, who's counting? Well, he's dead now, but in his lifetime. An awful lot of relationships. David Duchovny, who was married as well too, perhaps more than once, I've forgotten, but did admit to sex addiction at one point. And Tiger Woods, also married once, but running around with a great number of relationships. So, not a steadfast kind of character. Now, I don't want to paint every dual rising sign with the same brush and say that they're all, cheaters. That's certainly not true. It's a very general rule. The ambivalence. So we want to test that further by looking more closely at what is going on in the seventh house. So the first thing we see is that the Rahu-Ketu axis is running through the first and the seventh house. Now, with Rahu in the seventh, there's a compulsion towards relationships that may make a person very restless in this regard. It's all about the other. The pursuit of other people may come on suddenly. A lot of Cage's relationships have developed like almost literally overnight or in the space of a very short time. And that's typical of Rahu, which is capable of huge single-minded passion and something that almost rises to the level of obsessive need to pursue something or other. Now I talk about the placement of Rahu and Ketu in the houses in my recent book, Kala Sarpa. I mean, the subject is literally Kala Sarpa Yoga, but in framing it, I've talked at quite length about the effects of the nodes through the houses. So here we have Rahu in the seventh house with this compulsive need for relationships. That's one thing, the occupant of the seventh house. Are there any aspects upon the seventh? Yeah, there's the Sun and Mercury both aspect the seventh. So Mercury is Lord of the seventh, and that can create opportunity and also awareness and a conscious focus upon relationships. Mercury is strong as well too. Note that it is retrograde, therefore bright at birth. In the first house, it gains what we call digbala, or directional strength. So that's another source of strength as well too, which makes the whole field of relationships or seeking the other or cultivating relationships with the other as being significant. Now, that's not just in personal relationships. It can be about professional relationships as well. For instance, if one has an agent, in this field one does, a business manager, and Nicolas Cage has had problems with his business managers as well too. Back in, I've forgotten exactly the date, I think 2009, he ended up in a lot of financial difficulties, and he basically sued his business manager for, not paying his income tax and real estate taxes on time and neglecting to mind his financial affairs adequately and so on and so forth. And, his business manager countersued him, and eventually it was settled, but, needless to say, they're not together anymore. So the seventh house can reflect those other relationships too, including, for a model, an actor, or any kind of performer. The seventh house can also represent one's public as well too. And, with respect to Cage, his reception by the public has been on again, off again, or run hot, run cold kind of affair. He's done very well in the box office with some movies, and, other movies have been dogs. So it's not that he's, a bona fide draw for every movie that he has done. He's kind of a mixed performance in that respect. And he's been, personally a bit of a wild guy. Well, Rahu Ketu running through the first and seventh house will do that to a person, make one irregular, provocative, a little bit on the crazy side. And, he's gravitated towards those kind of roles in part because he himself was like that, dating back to his high school years. Rahu in the seventh, Mercury, Lord of the seventh, aspecting its own house, giving opportunity, focus. But note that Mercury, the Lord of the seventh, also falls on the Rahu Ketu axis. I mean, not only falls on it, is extremely tight with it. That's technically not in the same pada, but they are very close, less, only a degree and a half apart. So the whole notion of, irregularity and bohemian kind of lifestyle, and even his acting style, he characterized it as something he calls a nouveau shamanic. Interestingly enough, Rahu and Ketu are sort of associated with shamanistic practices, sort of witch doctor kind of otherworldly behavior or practices or pursuits. Anyway, that's part and parcel of his shtick, I guess. So when we analyze relationships, we always look at, the Lord of the seventh house, which we've now discussed, Mercury, the occupant of the seventh house, and any aspects to the seventh house. And, we're done with that. Sun aspects the seventh house as well, too, of course. That's a bit of a stress on Rahu because the sun is a malefic. Last but not least, we look at Venus because it's the Karaka for relationships. So Venus is over here in the second house. And Venus is with two prime malefics. And they're both very strong. Saturn is in Capricorn, its own sign. Mars is in Capricorn, where it's exalted. So Venus is quite literally hemmed, flanked, or boxed in here by two malefics, and both of which are very strong. So that's kind of injurious to, aesthetics, the enduring romance, so on and so forth. This is not part of today's discussion, but, this is one of what we call these sort of passion combinations, when either Moon or Venus, which represent sort of the girls of the chart, are associated with or aspected by Mars or Saturn, which we can characterize as, the bad boys of the chart. Then you have a person who's, a bit compulsive about pursuing relationships, especially, the sexual aspect of a relationship. So here you have a Venus, which is, in close company with Mars and Saturn, both being strong. And the Moon is aspected by Saturn by virtue of its 10th house aspect. So Saturn aspect 7 over here, 8, 9, 10 onto the Moon. So both Moon and Venus are influenced by Mars and Saturn, one of these classic passion combinations. Also in relationships, we always want to look for Kujadosha. Now, before I talk about it, be reminded that Kujadosha is what is it? An affliction thanks to Mars. And it's deemed to be problematic in one's youth, and it kind of, the zest of it, the martial energy is assumed to kind of burn off by age 28, 29, 30, by the time of when Saturn returned. That Martian energy will have sort of, burned itself out and is assumed to be less of a factor than in one's youth. However, there it does lie as a kind of a resident condition. Now, what are the rules for Kujadosha? It's easy to find a single case of Kujadosha in the chart because Kujadosha can occur if Mars is in house 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, or 12. Now, why is that? If Mars is in the first house, it aspects the seventh and irritates relationships. If Mars is in the second, it irritates family. If Mars is in the fourth, it aspects the seventh and irritates relationship. If Mars is in the seventh, it irritates the seventh house of relationship. If it is in the eighth, it aspects and irritates family. If it is in the 12th, it aspects and irritates the seventh house. Okay, but if you're counting, as I do all that, you'll note that houses 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, and 12, wow, that's 6 houses. 6 houses out of 12? If Mars is in one of those houses, that's Kujadosha? Yes, it is. Kujadosha from the ascendant. And it's very easy to find because, 50% of the time it'll be in your chart or your friend's chart or your other friend's chart. You've got to go further. We can also look at the moon and say, is Mars in the first, second, fourth, seventh, eighth, or 12th from the moon? Because the moon, treating it as Chandra Lagna, an alternate ascendant. If we didn't have a birth time at all, that's where we'd be going. So now judge where's Mars with respect to the moon. Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, there's Mars in the fourth house from the moon. So that's another case of Kujadosha from the moon. Last but not least, we look at Venus. Why Venus? Well, Venus is the karaka for relationships, and Mars has got the potential to irritate relationships. So we look at Venus, and there Mars is with it. So it's in house 1 with respect to Venus. So now we have Mars in one of these key houses from the ascendant, from the moon, and from Venus. So now you have a full-blown Kujadosha from all 3 perspectives. That's less common. It's still 1 out of 8 people. So 12.5%, but it's obviously much less common than just finding it in one of those key houses from just the ascendant. So he's got that as a factor, and considering that this Mars is also engaged in this passion combination with Venus and Saturn, just lends greater fuel to that particular fire. So over the years, some of these relationships have developed in different eras, of course. His first marriage to Patricia Arquette occurred under Jupiter Sun. That's Jupiter Dasha Sun Bhukti. So Jupiter is good in that respect, because it's quite strong. And over here in the navamsa, Jupiter is quite strong as well too. It's in its own signs, that's Sagittarius, and it's in a positive house, the 9th. As for the sun, in the Rashi, it is an irritant to the 7th because it's a malefic aspect in the 7th and associated with the 7th Lord too. And in the navamsa, the sun, although it's angular, that's good, it is debilitated. And so people can suffer during debilitated periods. So that marriage lasted roughly 5 years. Then he married Lisa Marie Presley in Saturn, so Saturn Dasha, Saturn Bhukti. So Saturn in the Rashi, it is in the 2nd house, which is considered to be representative of the 2nd marriage. First marriage in the 7th, 2nd marriage in the 2nd. So, but more to the point, in the navamsa, which is indicative of relationships, Saturn is in Adhisthana. So it has no dignity here in Virgo. It's on the Rahu Ketu axis as well. And is there anything good at all? No, nothing. You might say that it's flanked between benefics, Venus, Mercury on one side, Moon on the other, but that's quite minor compared to the fact that it's in Adhisthana, it has no dignity, and it's on the Rahu Ketu axis. So that marriage to Lisa Marie Presley lasted all of 3 or 4 months. So then time passes. Then he got married again a few years later in Saturn Mercury. So still not a good dasha. Mercury, however, is Lord of the 7th house. And, it's got some strengths, although, it's under stress being on the Rahu Ketu axis, and it's with the sun as well, too. In the navamsa, it's nicely placed. I mean, it's neutral by sign, but it's with Venus, and it has the aspect of a strong Jupiter, but it is aspected by Mars as well, too. So a bit of a mixed review, although, generally positive. That relationship lasted quite a while. I've forgotten the name of the lady, but it lasted like 11 to 12 years. So it was quite enduring, perhaps courtesy of that Mercury being in fairly good condition. The latest one which lasted less than a week, occurred in Mercury. So see, he went into Mercury in January of 2019. So again, Mercury's Lord of the seventh. It's under stress in the Rashi because of the Rahu Ketu axis and the presence of the Sun with that Mercury. In the navamsa, as I said, it's relatively good. You know, maybe he should have stuck it out a little longer than 4 days. Maybe this could have been more promising. But you know, the bias of of a chart like Nicolas Cage is that there is a great degree of restlessness. I mean, the dual signs, you know, contribute the foundation for that restlessness. But the Rahu Ketu axis running through the first and seventh house, and particularly closely conjunct the seventh Lord Mercury, really aggravates that restlessness and makes it quite difficult for him to pursue in relationships. So we'll see. Maybe he should try again in later on in Mercury Bhukti. I mean, he's got a couple of years to run. So who knows? Maybe fifth time lucky. We'll see. Okay, that's all I wanted to say today about Nicolas Cage and a general walkthrough on, you know, analyzing relationship prospects in any chart. Hope you enjoyed this. Come back again. Check out my other posts. Subscribe to my channel. See you later. Bye.